All right. Anytime I have these next two gentlemen on Sports Card Nation, it's always at least going to be a good time for us. I don't know about anybody else, but we're going to have fun. And like I said, they've been on before, and want to welcome back Chad and Tim from Pack to the Future podcast.
Hey, thanks, John. And I tell you what, I think we've got a pretty good goal to at least entertain one other person out there. I think we can do
One, just one.
it.
Well, guys, and you're back in more ways than one, right? Back on this show, having me chop it up with you, but Pack to the Future is back after a short, real short, thankfully, hiatus, and we're gonna get into that. But with Pack to the Future, you started that in February 2020, 3-man show at that time with you two and Ricky, and at that point, I was even 2 years in myself, self, and I became a fan of your show, as I said then, and just because you were doing things different than any other show out there, and that's hard to do when there's a lot of shows out there. And just some of the stuff you were doing, lives, going to whether it be a show or a card store, and then you went from there. Just talk about you know when you launched the podcast, was that kind of like on the vision board per se, or did it just kind of happen organically?
Oh man, there's so much to say about that. So the start of the show actually was what, Tim, a year or two before? You and I went to a breakfast place.
Yeah.
We have a running bit about brunch, but honestly, we went to go get brunch, and like we were drawing out what a show would look like, just like on a little napkin, a little notepad, and we didn't do anything with it for like a year,
Yeah.
maybe two.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that, the show kind of evolved into something new. And the beauty of that is when you have no clue what you're doing and that you don't know that there's kind of like a model or a playbook for it, then you're not expected to follow it. And I think
We did nothing of the sort. Yeah.
yeah. And so we like to have fun with the hobby. And essentially the thought was, how do we bring the fun and the camaraderie that we have together? How do we put it on the airwaves so that other people can enjoy that as well? And that's what we try to do. And, for a lot of people, it's a lot of fun. And we've met some great people, including yourself, John, because of that. And to that point, before we started the podcast, Tim, John, I remember listening to you. I'd be going grocery shopping with my wife and having earbud in and listening to your show and kind of like nodding along, like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And she would turn like, what? Like, oh, nothing. Like, yeah, let's get that apple. But there's a whole lot to it from the background. We certainly have loved hearing your show forever. So it's a lot of fun to be able to chat with you and be here.
Man, yeah. I mean, I still remember like you futzing around with like trying to get like the connections for the audio to, the recording and stuff.
Long.
Like, yeah, just trying to figure out the logistics behind hooking up a soundboard to just, a microphone. We're like, oh, there's one cable. How are we screwing this up?
Exactly. We're not going to tell the people that we're 20 minutes late recording this because we still couldn't figure it out.
Listen, you're good. You're good. I'm just glad you're here. Let me ask you this. You mentioned like kind of like sort of writing stuff down like a year in advance before you had, why so long? Was it trepidation? Why did it take a year, if you don't mind me asking?
Man, I mean, I didn't even get invited onto the show for a couple episodes. So.
There was still some debate as to whether or not Tim and I were going to
murder each other.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Or whether or not we were going to do a podcast together. And so that was part of it.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, with like the other side of our lives, we're very much regimented, and it's kind of drilled into our nature just with the work that we do, that you have to do things a certain way and you have to know what you're doing before you go do it. And so I don't know for you, Tim, but at least for me, a lot of that hesitation was, let's make sure that we at least try to know what we're doing before we do it.
Yeah, and that was certainly part of it, right? Like you want to be prepared for what you're doing, but you can probably go back and listen to our first season, our like first 6 months. We were just toying with every idea under the sun, and it didn't matter. Some like Chad once said, some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. You just throw it out there and try, right? And we've learned a lot from that. I feel like over time things kind of evolved to just kind of match our personalities and like what the show is always meant to be, and there was no prepping for that, right? Like you just have to go for it sometimes, and that's just true in life. I feel like.
I agree, and I'll say this, guys. I think some of the best shows I find like are the ones you don't do. As crazy as it sounds, a lot of prep. You just sort of fly by the seat of your pants, and it just it happens naturally, organically, however you want to phrase it. I think what I love about you guys, and I think I speak for others as well, is there's no phoniness. There's a little stickiness. There's a little comedy in there, but that's also really you guys. It's not you're not being someone completely different on the air, if you will. I think there is some cases where some shows maybe can't hang their hat on that peg, and to each their own, right? But I think most podcast listeners, especially in the hobby space, want someone who's genuine, passionate, doesn't really want an actor, if you will. We watch those folks on TVs and in movie theaters. So, but you came at it with a funny aspect. You know, I laugh out loud. Uh, with some of the bits that you guys do, and just mutual admiration there. I know you were very compliment, but I feel the same way about you guys, and just this like again some of the things you did that I don't want to say risky. I mean, this is, we're talking about a podcast here, not a $10 million film, but they are like the other people didn't do it, or either didn't think about it, or maybe too tentative to even go there. And you did a Secret Santa, which is not easy to do. You did a bulk sub in the grading space, and you just never like sort of sat on your laurels, and hats off for doing a lot of stuff that uh, other people, including myself, wouldn't even like attempt to do, and not only attempt to do it, but successful in the process. So, you know when you were three when we were three-man show, how difficult. I do a hobby hotline, which is sort of a conglomerate show. That's once a week. I'm not on it every week, thankfully. We have a rotation of hosts, but with you guys, you were pretty. I mean, sometimes someone was absent for a good reason, or traveling, or work, or what have you. But doing a three-man show on a regular basis, talk about maybe some of the difficulties of that. You made it look easy. I'm sure you made it look a lot easier than it actually was, but kind of talk to you got different personalities, maybe don't even agree on a certain topic. How how does that all come together, and you make it look flawless, but I'm sure it's not as easy as it looks.
So that definitely evolved with time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with many aspects of our show, much like your show, right? Like you had two separate shows, then you break out the quick hits, and now you have card mensch as well. And things evolve as you see need for improvement with time. Now, having three kind of from the start. I mean, Tim, we joke that you came later, but essentially you were there from the start too. And that worked because of the foundation that we had as friends, and also knowing that we could banter with each other,
Yeah.
and sometimes tell people that something's a stupid idea, and you still have that foundation of friendship to know that the next day, like hey, I apologize for saying that, or that was the wrong way to go. Let's take this a different direction. So the communication, I think, was kind of critical. We had a text thread that would always go.
Yeah.
Always, day and night. I mean, for me, I'm an early riser. So 4 a.m., these guys get texts from me. Ricky, Tim, you guys can be late night people, especially Ricky.
Yeah.
And so his text messages would come late, but the communication was something that we were always bouncing ideas off each other.
Yeah.
And I would say just a smaller percentage of things actually kind of stuck
Right.
to end up making podcasts, and some of them better than others. And like you said earlier, some of them we go back and look at and kind of scratch our head and we're like, oh man, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do in the time, but you live and learn.
Yeah, I mean, the logistics were tough, right? I mean, you got 3 different schedules for 3 professionals. I mean, you're talking 2 doctors and a lawyer, right? And so, like, our free time was a premium. But we made it a big, big commitment just to make it happen every week. We did not miss a week, and that was pretty cool. Like Chad hinted at, I mean, 3 different personalities too, right? And so, a lot of shows, I feel like podcasts are afraid to do more than 2 mics. We always thought it was just natural having the 3 of us, because I mean, having that third voice, that third perspective, like, that 2 versus 1 dynamic sometimes, it was just really fun. Topic wise, we were rotating, every third week to try to just, hey, Chad's going to produce this week so that we get less arguments about the topics. Ricky would edit that same week, and then, I'd be on social media and we just rotate. And so that offloaded a lot of the responsibility. So instead of just like a solo show like yours, I mean, like we counted on each other week to week. And I think that was just a pretty unique dynamic too. You could probably tell who produced which episode on a given week because it was just really obvious. Like, sometimes I'm data driven. Chad's, kind of like the comedy, like, cynic guy. And then Ricky's just, he could be talking about like the hamburger he was eating that week, And so,
And make you laugh while doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was pretty fun that way. It never got old. We gave each other all sorts of grief each week, and it was genuine. I mean, like we just let it fly on air, and I think that was the fun part. Is that was our stress relief for the week. We legitimately looked forward to recording and being with each other. And as adults at this stage of life, that's pretty rare, to have that committed time together. I mean, you ask anybody in our age range, 30s to 40s, like there's work, there's life, there's, your relationships, like to find and carve out an hour and a half each week. It was challenging for sure, just like you hinted at, but it was well worth it. I mean, just the stuff that we could talk about in the hobby, stuff changes like minute to minute. So that's why our text thread was, by the end of when we needed to record, like things we talked about, even just like 60 minutes ago, sometimes became irrelevant, right? You think back to like the Logan Paul Pokemon thing, right? By the time we wanted to record that episode, it'd been covered to death, right? So the fact that we were recording, once a week, that did make it challenging to try to stay relevant at times. But, so that's why we had to go to a different direction. I felt like, there's people with far more time, far more energy, far more devotion to like really hashing out the nitty gritty, like doing internet detective work. That wasn't us. So we just had to have our funny takes on stuff. And that's kind of how the show, really evolved, I guess.
And that's one last point to that, which I think Tim nailed it, is we don't necessarily know a lot about a given subject, and we never claim to. Tim probably knows the most out of any of us card related, but I think the good like take home message for anyone listening that I think applies to any aspect of life, if you have an idea about something, try it. And just because it's outside of the norm, doesn't mean that it's wrong. And that's how things evolve. And it's still not to say that we ever nailed exactly what we wanted to do. So we'll be the first ones to tell you we don't think we did, but you certainly have fun doing it, and you can explore new avenues by trying.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we're just...
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Tim.
Well,
a couple of things I want to... See how hard 3 guys in the show is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was the other key. So Zoom is very difficult with 3 people. I know one of the predominant card podcasts does that, but Zoom can be very difficult, or any type of virtual, because there's that split-second lag. And it may sound very trivial to people listening, but even as we try to go through it, there's that slight delay in catching someone's facial tone to know when they're truly done or not. So that always made it entertaining. We just tried to lean into it when it got super awkward early on.
The other thing too, you mentioned like trying stuff, and then, after the fact, that didn't go as well as maybe I thought, at least in my mind or on paper. I think we could all say that, right? And not just in the hobby podcast space, but just in the podcast space. If what are we, 200 something episodes into this show, and if I listen to the early episodes, I cringe, and I even say, man, if they really weren't part of the archive, I would probably delete them. They're
Yeah.
terrible. I don't know how much better
Yeah.
they are now in the 200, but I know they're a little bit better. Just in the fact of upgrading microphone and different editing features and
Yeah.
different things like that. But and people were honest. Listeners are honest. There were segments I did where people would say, "Hey, I love the show, John, but." Here comes the but, which I welcome because that's how we get better. This new segment you're doing, I'm not a huge fan. You get three, four, five, or more of those kind of like, hey, love the show, but I don't like the new segment, and you kind of know, all right, we tried it, not very popular, not and you pivot and you take it out and you either replace it with something else or you don't, and you just leave it out, and then you try something else, and that works both ways too. I've had people like, hey, I love that segment, or even add on to it. Like, hey, I love what you're doing, but even adding on to it. And one of those segments that I do on Hobby Quick Hits is, and I try not to overdo it, but I try to do I do what's called like hobby histories or legends of the hobby, and I try to real quickly. I don't want to overdo it, 15, 20 minutes, and talk about someone from who's no longer with us that's had an impact on the hobby. And because with a lot of new people coming in to the hobby, right, they may not be familiar with these folks, but and sometimes they may not even care, quite frankly, but maybe in given 15 minutes, 20 minutes to hear about these folks, it'll they'll come to know them, and kind of where we might be here in 2023. But if it wasn't for certain things, like anything, right, the bridges to the past, we wouldn't be at this point. And I'm old, so I'm I was around when some of those guys were alive, so it's sort of me paying homage to them. And when I started to do those, and I do them about once every 6 weeks, that's why I say I don't know. When I started to do that, I wasn't sure how that was gonna go, right? Were people gonna message me like, "Hey, man, John, that's great, but I don't really care about that dead guy. Like, can we not, not my favorite." But quite the opposite happened. I had kind of two responses. People loved it, and even people who knew who I was talking about already. People told me, "Hey, I know that person, and the way you presented it, I didn't know certain things you brought to light. Like I learned even more. I thought I knew a lot about that person, and now I know even more from listening to that episode." So those kind of things, right? You get that feedback, positive and negative, and you don't know. You do something, you think, "Oh, this is going to be great," and people tell you, "I don't like it." And then you do something like the example I just gave with the hobby legends, right? You're thinking, "I don't know how this is going to go over," and people surprisingly say, "Hey, no one's doing anything like that. I appreciate it," and that you don't do it all the time. So when it comes out, I kind of looking forward to learning about someone. So it's those things. People are will tell you, as you guys know, right? People will tell you, love it, not a fan. Some people are more polite in some cases than others, and that's okay. I know you guys are the same way. I've heard you say it on your show. I say it on this show. Let me know your feedback. That's how we get better, good or bad. You know, and so you guys are very much like that. You're willing to take those risks too, and I think people appreciate that. People know when that's going on. I think most people do. And you've done some zany stuff that's got me smirking or laughing, or in even some cases, hey, why didn't I think of that first? So or in some cases, like, I'm kudos to these guys because there's no way I could have pulled that off. So but you know, all that stuff is it's a feather in your cap for doing that, being different, and that's why when I was sad when I'm listening to that episode in September, and then heard that news. Like, kind of talk about that, whatever you can share. I know there's a Ricky's involved in that too, and we respect to him. But did you kind of know was when did you realize that this might be the case? You know, we the general public, myself included, found out in September, right? But sort of, sort of the behind the Pact of the Future podcast on VH1. When did internally sort of, you know what I mean, that you thought that this was a possibility? We'll say it like that, I guess.
It was probably the bar fight, to be honest. Um, I knew when I had him in a sleeper hold that things weren't going well. Um,
Yeah.
no, I think, one thing that we have always done a really good job of is not only just kind of talking cards, but also making sure that we're staying in touch with how people are doing, in life. And I think that there came a point when just lots of things were building up in life and with work and with podcast and responsibilities. And we're like, gosh, should we take it a different direction or try and do more? And, that can be really stressful. And I think it started to become stressful for all of us.
Mhm.
And we joked, if you go back and listen throughout the years, we had kind of joked at different times, like, oh, this week Tim's quitting the show and he's done and he's fed up. Or this week Chad's so mad at the most minute thing that he's swearing off the show forever. And, it's us kind of living our lives too, like giving a little peek at, the stressors in life that go on. And so I think that just leading up to it, that there wasn't a whole lot. It's just things come up and come to a head. And at some point you got to look and say, all right, what's the most critical thing in life for me right now that we got to focus on? And, Ricky was really good and said, hey, I got to take some time and focus on some other things and still love everyone out there. And this is just what I've got to do. So it was kind of quick to answer the question. And anytime things end, at least for me, I don't want to put words in Tim's mouth. Anytime things that are there that you feel either great passion for, or you have a really high sense of involvement or pride in, and they end, regardless of the terms for it, it's just hard.
Yeah.
Like those things they're just hard. But for the circumstance, at least for me, not to put words in his mouth, but I love the fact that he said, hey, here's what's going on. And I respect him for it, for saying that this just needs to take a back seat because other things need to take priority in my life. And so it needs to end. So even though it's tough, you got to respect someone for saying that.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I mean, we do have plenty of other stuff going on in the background, right? We are not, I don't know, would you say that we've never really considered ourselves like content creators? I mean, this was like a hobby for us, like a side project. And at the end of the day, it was fun, right? So life priorities definitely, went over. It was a challenge every week trying to figure out like our own work schedules, just that alone, right? Yeah. We've got families to balance. And so, I mean, just like Chad said, I mean, we kind of joked, oh, well, no, I'm ready to quit. It's like, I'm sure like at plenty of times we've all kind of left unsaid, it's like, I'm done. Right. Like, but because it was a dedication, like we were dedicated to each other, we were dedicated to the show. You power through some weeks where you just really didn't have it. And so, I think it just kind of culminated in a more natural like endpoint. And then once Ricky, said that he needed to take a step back, it just felt like a logical point to, just take a step back, reevaluate, see what's going on. And we're really excited to see what's going to, come out in the future. We're not going anywhere. We want to stay relevant in the hobby. And so it's going to be different, right? A two-man show versus a three-man show is just different. But we got some stuff in store, so stay tuned.
Yeah, we're super excited for what's coming forward and have some good ideas to even, further evolve like we talked about before and make things a little bit better based off feedback that we heard. Like, hey, what's the best way to listen to this podcast or to engage or have fun with it? And Tim and I have gone back to the brunch board, if you will, and did that a few months ago. Went back and had some more meals and wrote down some notes. And Tim brings up a good point. We're super excited for what we've got coming. Should be out now, actually, by the time that people are hearing this. So we're very, very excited to give it to you.
Well, we're glad you're back, and it's tough. We talk about an hour and a half show, an hour show, and you guys know I'm preaching to the choir here. That's what's the end result. but there's a lot more that goes into an hour of content of hobby production.
Mhm.
That's what comes out of the sausage machine. But what went in it, right, is 2, 3, maybe even more hours of editing and just get uh,
Yeah.
research, right? It's more than just turning the mic on. You got your notes. You want to get stuff factually correct as much as you can. And like you guys pointed out earlier, right? The hobby's changing by the minute. It's a little calmer now, truth be told, but
Yeah.
definitely during the heyday, right? It was just a frantic pace. You're talking about one story and there's three new ones that people want to hear your opinion or your take on. They're like, "Hey, that was 20 minutes ago, and there's three more stories that we're more focused on." And so it's off, and I always say it's a grind. It's a labor of love, right? If we don't love it, you got to. I always, when someone who's about to start a show asks me, and that does happen, hey, any advice, John? I'm like, you gotta have a passion, you gotta have a love for it. And if it, people can tell when you don't. Like that stuff, kind of people can read
Super easy.
between the lines. And someone asked me once, like, John, how will you know, like, when you're done, like, doing the show, if that point ever comes? And it's easy. It won't be anyone else telling me I stink. It won't be me looking at a demographics report and being disappointed. It's going to be when I turn the mic on and it feels more like a task, a chore, a job,
Yeah.
and like I'm going through the motions. And I don't think that will ever happen, guys, but you never know. And if it does, I'm going to be honest. And whether it's even a full stop or hey, I got to take a break, I'll never say never. Sort of like kind of uh, you know what you guys did, and now back, thankfully. Enough about me. When so you stopped in September, when did you first, probably the break was good, right? You kind of decompress, catch your breath. You don't have to worry about that for a while. What was that first week like when you didn't record?
Oh,
The
I've got a
first
story.
week when you would normally have an episode, and yet here there was no PTTF that week. What was that like? I know for people who love the show, they were disappointed, but for you guys, that produced the show, what was that week, from what you can recall, like?
Yeah. Good.
I know that my wife is someone who I'm going to be with forever because she listened to me complain so much about how there wasn't a Pack to the Future episode that Saturday morning, and she didn't say one negative word about it. So that's how I knew. Um, this is funny though. The first week or two after that, the break on Thursday nights, which is when we typically record, that was nice. Tim talked about time constraints, so having that little break was great until reality sets in that, like, oh, we aren't recording anymore. And that camaraderie that we just had built into our schedule is gone.
Yeah.
That sucked.
It felt like a three-way breakup. It sucked.
It did. We did. We talked about that. We talked about being a breakup. And, you know, I had reached out to you, Tim, and I said, hey, why don't we just pick this up and go? And you're like, well, let me just like take some time. Let's regather thoughts and let's just see what happens. And I was so mad at that response for some reason. I mean, we all know, like, I clearly have an irrational, like, sporadic little anger that pops out on a moment's notice. And it came out, and I was telling some of my wife and her friends, like, I can't work with Tim if he's doing this. And, just clearly frustrated. Then the next morning, I wake up and text him and tell him I'm sorry. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, oh, I said things that I shouldn't have. But, that's how the first couple of weeks were. It was odd, but we started talking about it really quickly after that.
Yeah, I mean, in any path of life, right, you can get to a point where you feel burnt out. And I think, like the edges were raw, right? But you recharge pretty quickly. And you mentioned passion. Like we freaking love cards, man. Like we love the hobby. And so to be away from that in some way, shape, or form, it was hard. And so, I think ultimately that's what drew us back too. I mean, it just was natural. It's like, well, we still have stuff coming in the mail. We still have stuff, that we're looking for on eBay. Like, I'm still on Facebook scrolling through groups. I'm not razzing anymore, but it's
That he'll tell us about.
but I've still got stuff that is legitimately coming in the mail, and that like I'm making a list for to collect, right? Working on like a PSA set registry, and that's still going on. That's stuff that's worth talking about, and people have experiences that are worth sharing, and I think you've always said the hobby's about the people, right? And
Yep.
we're part of that. Our community that was listening to our podcast was part of it. They were super sad that we went off the air, and they're still super sad, and they keep messaging us. It's like, hey, when are you guys coming back? And so, yeah, we just really hope to have that chance to have that passion again and share it with other people. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all our podcast was. We were just shooting the breeze, talking about cards. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that's why I loved it, and a lot of other people did too. When you knew you're coming back, obviously you're keeping the name. Was there any consideration to being it was sort of two people instead of three? Like, hey, let's change. Even though it's popular and we've made a name for ourselves with the podcast name, let's rebrand. Or what did that even was that even a thought? You don't have to say names or whatever, but was or did you know like we're this is the show, we're just bringing it back?
John, you ask better questions than me inquiring to my patients where their controlled substance prescription went. I'm impressed. Like, Tim's got this light set up in our studio here, and this thing feels like it's 10 times more magnified than when we started. These are good questions. In fact, so good that I even forgot where I was going with that.
Oh, yeah, no, so nice dodge.
The heat's on. Tim, I'm going to pass that to you. That's the benefit of having a two-person show.
No, we shot around a couple names, and they all got shot down real quick. I mean, like we tried to play off the fact that we're two doctors, and we were like, doc to doc. But then that loses the passion for the cards. It's like nobody's going to listen to a card podcast called Doc to Doc. It's like get off your high horse. So.
And I will say this with like communication with Ricky on the other side of it too. Yeah. Immediately after, it wasn't so like there was no fight, no breakup, nothing like that. It was like, hey, I got to take this break. You guys want to keep rolling, keep doing it. It's something we all kind of created together in a way. And so there was that consideration, but ultimately we decided let's keep it rolling.
Yeah.
Back to the Future season 2.
There you go. Look at that.
Yes.
Look at that. Yeah, and I think, listen, like you said, it wasn't on bad terms. Like if it was, if it was bad terms, or like the Van Halen situation where David Lee Roth got fired, and then but they still kept the name too because they were well known. But I get it. I'm glad for the 2 cents that it's worth for me. Like you built that brand up. You were 2/3 of that to begin with. And it sounds like, I don't want to speak for him. He's not on the screen with us, but it sounds like Ricky was signed off on that as well. And that's always nice that it's a battle that you don't have to fight or lead into. And I think it makes it. I think it made that. I don't want to speak for you. You guys are right here. Probably made that decision probably actually a little bit easier, that you weren't necessarily worried what that the other gentleman would, in this case being Ricky, would think about it or be upset or that sort of thing. He kind of gave, it sounds like he gave his blessing, and that just made that transition easier.
Yeah, I hope so. Otherwise, we're going to have to talk to our legal department, which actually used to be Ricky. So that could become a problem. If there are any attorneys out there who would like to join our partnership, we could definitely use someone right now.
That's funny. Well, listen, it's good that you're back. Let's talk a little hobby. So for those listening, you guys are rolling again. That's a good thing. Back to the Future podcast. The hobby. I know it's only been 3-4 months, but really the hobby from where we're talking about news cycle changing in minutes. It's still a busy hobby, but the news cycle's not as hectic. If you ask me, I mean, you think we're seeing prices sort of kind of come back to reality, a reset, if you will. The hobby is not dead, contrary to what some people are out there, with clickbait banners. It's alive and well. I'm a dealer. I set up at shows. Believe me, I see what I see. It's just prices have sort of kind of come down, and if you're in this hobby long enough, you knew that was going to happen. Like you can't be that surprised. And then we see, real world macronomics. That's definitely a factor as well. Do you think doing a show now compared to like during the boom and the crescendo, you think it'll be more difficult, not easier, or it is what it is, and you just go with the flow?
Well, we could have different answers on this. Do you have a thought?
I think that's a great time just to get back to basics, John. I mean, I think anybody out there who wants to get back into the hobby, this is a safe entry point again.
Yeah,
You're not buying at the peak of anything. You're at, I don't know, I don't want to say it's like a reset, but it basically is, right? Like, I mean, you're going back in the past a little bit, and getting to enjoy the hobby for what it actually is. I hope. I mean, you can actually grade cards again, semi reasonably.
yeah,
You can collect cards cheaply again. Even like super unobtainable cards, like are within reach again. Like the
yep,
BGS 8.5 Jordan rookie card the other day, I saw for what, like $8,000. I mean, that's a fierce difference compared to 2 years ago. So
yeah.
stuff like that. I mean, there's new ways to, collect again and maybe even open a hobby box again. Shoot,
Yeah.
like,
Which is kind of a big premise of like where
yeah,
we started, right?
yeah.
Was getting together and doing that. And so I think as far as content goes from that perspective,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be perhaps a little bit easier
Mm-hmm.
because the flip market, the looking at markets every day and seeing if cards are going up or down, like yes, that's something we would report on to kind of know what cards we could buy, but was never our thing. Like we never proclaimed to
Yeah.
be experts in that field. And so now that that isn't as prominent and prices are so much more reasonable than they were 2 years ago, you could go back and buy some of those cards, like Tim said, ones that you just want to collect and have fun with, that are so much more reasonably priced than before. And that for us, each time we buy a card, it kind of gets the wheels churning about, okay, how could we create that into content and make it fun and enjoyable? So I think it's going to make that perspective much easier and a bit more fun too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Tim makes a great point. There were cards that were out of your reach that are now back in your reach, right? And to me, that's going to bring a whole segment of the hobby kind of back into view. I think sometimes when your target list or your hit list or want list, whatever you want to call it, when 75% of that is really unobtainable, it's disheartening, and it can
Mm-hmm.
cause probably some people to like, you know what, the stuff I want, I can't afford. I'm probably going to exit stage left, right? And some of those folks are going to come back, and if they didn't leave, some of those things on that list are now able to be crossed off and obtained. And so sure, as a dealer, and I'm one, but crazy as it sounds, I'm glad. Sure, did I have to reprice and put some new stickers on some of the show inventory? Sure, but I also bought some stuff that I wouldn't been able to. So it's a two-way street. You got to look at it like that. And I did a show where I talked about that line where dealers, as a dealer, I'll never really try to ask for over comps. I just won't put the card out, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll go in the PC. But I'm not, I'm not a guy that wants the people, you know, everyone's got their phone out. It's not rocket science, and so it's to me, it's like you got, as a dealer, you got to decide, I want to sell it for what the market's going for, or I'm not going to, put it out there and tease someone, or just be blatantly overpriced. At that point, just keep it. But I think initially you saw that. I know you guys go to shows and stores and stuff. I think initially, dealers were holding out for as long as they could, but I think now reality sort of settling in, and again, Tim brought up a great point. Cards that were out of your reach are now back in it, and considerably so. And many that you probably didn't expect, even that Jordan rookie being a prime example, but even others. So I think that's a good thing when more people can enjoy the hobby and obtain cards that create that enjoyment, that passion. I think that's a good thing. And if that means I have to sell a few of those kind of cards less than initially priced, then that is what it is. That comes with the territory. And it's I always say this, guys, and I know you agree. The prices are more performance based, right? If the guy is playing well, or the athlete, I don't want to say, the athlete's playing well, the card's most likely going to go up. Right now, Joe Burrow cards are going up, and for expected reasons. And it's always been that way. We just have more analytics now. I'm old school. I don't know about you guys. I'm more old school than looking at charts and graphs. And if I wanted to do that every day, I would have got my broker license and went to Wall Street. I know it's got its place in the hobby, and I'm not, it's just not my forte. I'm a guy that watches sports. That's a sports fan, and that's sort of my charts and analytics was box scores and watching. So, your thoughts kind of on everything there that I just threw at you.
Well, I think to one point, at least over the past couple of years, so much of player price wasn't necessarily on performance. Long term and Hall of Famers and people who had retired, sure, that would be the case. But still, some of the prices for prospects, whether it was a baseball
Yeah,
prospect or just rookies, were so absurd compared to even the highest value card of Hall of Famers and outpricing them. And there's plenty of those examples that are out there, and even that people highlight on social media. But still, like wrapping my head around that concept, just based off potential, was so backwards to me. And for some people, it worked out great. I tried to dabble in that. And we poked fun of that at the show when I tried to do that with guys on my team, like Drew Lock and Jerry Judy. And it's just like, oh my gosh, what in the world was I doing? Like, just light my money on fire and make a scene out of it. But I think that has started to cool a little bit, at least what we see at our local card shop and occasionally when we stop by shows, that we don't see as much of hype driving the price, which for me is an enjoyable way to collect and stay away from, right? So that's been kind of nice in that regard.
Yeah, I was talking about how the PSA 10 hype, things got crazy expensive for PSA 10s, right? And so, especially for cards you really wanted, I was always really happy about owning gem mint cards, right? Because I'm a perfectionist a little bit that way. But the prices got so out of hand for the cards that I wanted, John, that like I actually got, I don't want to say depressed, but it was definitely a hobby funk. For a
yeah.
solid half year, I was like, I can't chase after these cards anymore. So I had to basically reinvent, my identity as a hobbyist. I actually shifted into being okay with PSA nines. I mean, oh my gosh, right? Like the card's still better than a pack pulled card, but the value, the cost value ratio was just so much better. And
Yep.
so there's good things that came out of what people perceive as a bad stretch of the hobby. I mean, but this is as good a time as any to kind of reevaluate and see what you want to do. So I like that.
With the reboot of the show, do you think it'll change how you guys hobby, or you guys just that with the experience you have under your belt, you think like I know what I want to do, like creating content won't really change my mindset.
I don't think so for
Yeah.
me, because I think a lot of what we discuss and talk about comes organically from what we enjoy.
Mhm.
We have that experience, and then we try to tailor it into content that would also be relevant for the time frame. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that it would change because of that.
People want the stories, right? Like they want the authentic stories. They want to like live part of the hobby through you. And so we
Yep.
don't go actively seeking for content, if that makes sense. Like we talk about what we're actually doing. Like, that should be
Yep.
the like the spring from which everything flows, I feel like, I mean, because otherwise what are we doing? Like then it's not a hobby, it becomes a production. So
And some of the things
Yep.
that may have seemed more content driven, like whether it was the group submission or doing a Secret Santa, or Ricky and I racing each other to see who gets to open up a box of cards first, or playing pranks at who's going to the card shop without the other person. Like all those things would still happen and still do happen whether the show's there or not.
yeah.
And because it's
Yeah.
fun, right? It takes us outside of any stressors that we may have during our day lives and brings this enjoyment and camaraderie there. And so that's going to happen regardless of the show. So we figure why not put it on the show and let other people enjoy it, just like Tim said.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what I figured that's what you were going to say, but I thought it would be a kind of a good question to ask and get your feedback on it. We got every day we're one day closer back to the national. It's in Chicago again this year. I know last year Atlantic City a little further away than Chicago for you guys. And I don't know if it's a secret or whatnot, but are you planning? Are you both planning to attend the national in Chicago here in July?
Yeah, 100%. Short of booking the flights so far. I mean, the hotels are booked. We've looked at tickets and packages. We're saving up our little pennies for
Yeah.
penny sleeves and hopefully cars to put them in. So, yeah, it's going to be a good show, I think. Prices should be reasonable. It'll be good to see people that we didn't, get a chance to hook up with link up with.
That was a good save. That was a good save. I'm impressed.
Last year.
It's a
You know,
family show.
yeah, they're only, they're, yeah. No, what do we call our hobby dating site that we were going to create? Binder instead of.
That was one of those bad ideas. That was one of the
We
ones
can
we talked
always
about
bring
earlier.
it back. We can always bring it back and tweak it a
That
little
one
bit.
doesn't need to go anywhere, John. That
No,
needs to
yeah.
stay buried.
Yeah, it should be a fun show. We're excited. I mean, Chicago should really, I feel like, just be the main show. I mean, it's just such a central location, but I get it. I mean, so much of the original hobby guys are just all on the East Coast. So I mean, I understand having the show out there, but yeah, AC is like a whole day journey there and back for us. So that just ended up not happening. So.
Yeah, I'm a fairness guy. I get it. I like, even though I'm an East Coast guy, I'd like to see California or the West Coast, whether that be
Mm-hmm.
Seattle or pick a city. Also get it in fairness to those. I would still try to go or probably go just the same. And I'd like to see it rotate a little more, but like you just said, Tim, I think Chicago's sort of the fairest, right in the center. And so, if you live right near Chicago and it's in your backyard, that's great. But even whether you're coming from East or West Coast, it's sort of splitting the difference, if you will. And so I get it. And Chicago's always been, when you hear people talk about the national, that Chicago's always spoken of fondly, the show and the venue and the city. So I don't mind, but I always try to think of everyone, and I would like to see a West Coast National again. They've done it before; it wouldn't be the first time. So been many moons though, but I would try to travel and go and support, the show, the hobby, and have fun just the same. And I've never been that far west, so it gave me a reason
Oh,
to do it. So Dallas, states wise, Dallas is about as far west as I've been. I've been to like
oh.
I don't have the map in front of me. I've been to like Belize and Rotan and Costa Rica, so I don't know where that falls on the west scale. But states wise, Dallas is about as west as I've been. So I'd like to change that. With a West Coast national, maybe not every year, guys, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think in fairness, Seattle, I think would be again, I don't know the conventions there, halls there, or hotels are obviously a priority. But Seattle's a big city from what I'm aware of. I think it could be
for
done
sure.
there. I'd love to see it. Somewhere. where those folks on the West Coast maybe have to travel a little bit less than they're used to. In fairness to those folks. So
We would
uh,
certainly
even
advocate
even Den
for that.
even Denver area. I mean, that's a great
Yeah.
city. From people who I know that have been there. I like to see a couple new cities get it. Just because right now it's sort of on that four city, really three, and the rumor is it's not coming back to Atlantic City. So right now it's just Chicago and Cleveland. I mean, kind of finish up with if you could pick, where would you like to see the national?
Hmm.
Oh.
I mean, Vegas has been really popular for their own little, shoot off show now. Dallas,
Yeah,
I'm not like crazy about, but they're doing their quarterly show, monthly show almost now, right? Like, so I mean, there's other cities and venues.
yeah,
Southern California may not be a bad option, right?
Yeah,
Somewhere where you are pretty certain you're going to get nice weather,
yeah,
so that you can convince loved ones or your family to go along with you, and they can go do their thing,
that's not a bad
um,
yeah,
idea. Yeah.
and still have perhaps international airport nearby, so you can accommodate everyone to get there.
Mm,
And I think
yeah,
Southern California would be great. I tell you what, you could do it here in Salt Lake City. It's great out here now. It gets to about a high of 20. Our air quality's poor. We have no water.
yeah. And there's no
yeah,
major sports teams besides the Jazz, so it's awesome.
Yeah. John, you should come out here
yeah.
sometime. It'd be great.
Well, listen, I love to travel, so it doesn't take much to talk me into it. I'd probably even a van that just like has candy spray painted on the side of it. I'd probably get it. So I'm pretty easy to convince. But no, I think Vegas, they're kind of doing some of the shows, the Mint Collective. So, I love, like you said, Chad, Southern California, Anaheim. They've done them there before. Actually, the 91, which I didn't go. I'm new to the National for as long as I've been in the hobby. Was my first one was what 2018 or 2017, whichever one the Chicago one was, and
Yeah, 17.
but that
Yeah.
91 that 91 Anaheim is most that it went, or the powers that be will tell you that was the number one attended show, the
Mm,
record breaking show. And when you think about the hobby in 91, it's surprising that that's held up compared to the hobby now, but that's what they say. And Dr. Beckett has said that as well, and he's been to every one. So I'm gonna take him at his word, and so I think it's proved. California's kind of proven that they can host a show, and yeah, be more money and more travel for me, but every once in a while, it's only fair, right, to see the West Coast get one, and you know. But they do that, then they got to bring it back to the East Coast. I know that Atlantic City's sort of been ruled out, but maybe another city, maybe Charlotte, or somewhere on the East Coast, even Florida, maybe somewhere in Florida.
You
So
got to be
I
careful of
don't
those
know.
Florida people, John.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
our good
hear you.
friend Kyle's from there, but even him, it's about as far as I can go as trust wise.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We got as there's some new people running in charge of the national. We'll see what new wrinkles that may bring to the event itself, and maybe to the location. But guys, I thank you for making time. I'm glad you guys are back. I know I speak for a lot of other folks as well, and listen forward to hearing you guys on the airwaves again. Give out all that stuff, all the socials, websites, whatever you need to share to get everyone up to speed. Take your time. Whoever wants to do it, or both of you, go right ahead.
All right. Well, John, to finish up that point about travel, if you're ever out in Salt Lake or you want to come to Salt Lake, I've got entire basement, the nice bar, ready to podcast in. You are always
Yeah.
welcome to stay in it.
There you go. Be careful.
Hey,
I have
you're
a
welcome. We got
I
a
have a
guest room
blank
down there.
tab on my computer open that I can just. But no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
But yeah, we are starting up season 2 of Pack to the Future podcast. We are most active on social media on Instagram. And we have a website that we would love for everyone to go check out at pttfpodcast.com. We have discounts to various card-related merchandise. We have our eBay affiliate link. You can listen to all of our shows and see photos there as well. You can find our podcast, Tim, on every major platform that's out there under Pack to the Future podcast. What did I miss?
I think that's it. Yeah. Good job. Pack to the Future podcast at gmail.com if you want to troll us and send us, love letters for February 14th.
Or
That's
get
right.
or early get in on that hobby dating site early. Get your photo,
Yep.
get
We'll
your
send you a
photo
discount
in
code for
early.
that.
You can take top priority on that site that you're building. Well, all joking aside, guys, sincerely from me, welcome back. I know a lot of other people, like I said, feel the same way, and I'm sure it'll be like you never missed a beat, and glad to have you back. Continued success as well.
Likewise, man. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Thanks for having us on.